Welcome to the Coffee and Kidlit Show. My name is Travis D. Peterson, and I am a children's book author as well as a book designer. On this show, I like to bring in guests who are also children's book authors who have published inspiring books and really books that you can use to inspire your kids to greatness. And today is no different. I'm happy to have Krystal Wallick on the show today, and she's the author of the Ari the Brave series, which I have right here under my stack of other junk. Anybody else keep a messy office like I do? Yeah.
Oh.
Um, yeah, so you have Ari the Brave's Jungle Journey and Ari the Brave and the Magic Dream Fairy. Now, I think I saw that there was a third one. Is it out yet? Or are you working on it?
There's not a third Ari the Brave, but there is a third book separate from the series that I wrote with my daughter. And that
Okay,
one is called My Feelings Are a Hurricane. And I have that one here.
I did see the cover for that. Yeah.
I didn't get that. Oops. Could you try again? Sorry about that. Siri thought I was talking to her. Yeah, so that one's totally separate, and it's really, really different than the Ari series, but still very good. It actually sells better than the Ari books.
Really? Is it
Yes.
your newest, or when did you put it out?
So it actually was published August 2021, right around the same time as the first Ari book.
Yeah.
Um, as I was going through writing the Ari book, the first one, and doing the illustrations and all of the process that it goes through, my daughter said, "Well, I have an idea for a book, and I want to write a book too." And I was like, "Okay," and let's do it. And
Yeah.
so I kind of told her, like, if we're gonna publish this and I'm gonna put out real money to illustrate this and design this and publish it, let's make sure that we have a really good book and that it's a really sellable idea. And so she came up with some great stuff, and we ended up publishing it right around the same time as the first Ari book.
That's awesome. And so how old was your daughter when you published that one?
She was 7.
7. Yeah. So, Krystal, just give us a little introduction of yourself because I know you have a good background for the type of books that you write. So, yeah.
Yeah, so my background is in social work and mental health. I've been I was a therapist for a very short period of time, and I realized that the one-on-one being a therapist was not really for me. Very quickly into this career that I had just spent many, many years studying. So what I ended up doing, I still love the world of mental health, and I went into mental health education. So I have been teaching. I started out working in schools and teaching teachers and school leaders about the importance of mental health in schools and emotionally safe classrooms, and the importance of putting our kids' emotions and their emotional safety ahead of academics, because you can't teach math if your kids don't feel safe. You can't teach them how to read if they're hungry. Like, just their basic needs need to be met before they start the learning stuff. And so that was, I transitioned into that, and I did that for about 8 or 9 years. And then just recently I made a switch into healthcare. So I now work at a hospital doing the same thing that I've been doing for the past few years, but with doctors and nurses and healthcare staff, and teaching them about the importance of mental health in the hospital and the relation between mental health and physical health. And the importance, same thing, the importance of emotional safety, regardless of where you are. So if we want our patients to heal and our patients to get better, they have to feel emotionally safe. And so it's a lot of the same, content that I've been teaching, a lot of the same work that I've been doing, but with a new population. And I think it's really exciting with this population because, I think that emotionally safe environments in schools has been talked about. We've been talking about that for a couple of years now. But to talk about that in healthcare is kind of new. So it feels pretty groundbreaking to be doing this work. And it's really, really exciting for me. So that's me.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd like to hear some of the, I guess, what changes you have seen, or how you've seen kind of the schools system especially kind of adjust to this new focus. Like how has it improved the
Mhm.
classroom, or interacting with the kids?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting because at first things got really overwhelming for the schools. And they were like, we're seeing a lot more kids with mental health issues. We're seeing a lot more kids having suicidal thoughts. We're seeing a lot more of this. What's going on? And I had to tell them, yes, things seem to be a little bit overwhelming, but the reason for that is because this education that we're doing that's leading to these emotionally safe environments is getting kids to talk. It's not that they're having more issues or that they're feeling worse. It's that for the first time in their life, they feel comfortable to talk about it. And so,
Mm.
yes, you're overwhelmed because we didn't add more staff when we started this education. But it's really a good thing. And it's going to get a little bit bad before it gets good. But it's really good to see kids talking about things, talking about their struggles, going to the guidance counselors, going to their school counselors, talking to their school psychologists and saying, I'm having these really dark feelings
Mm.
and I don't know what to do with it, but I need to tell someone. And so I had to kind of explain to them, this is really good. This is it is amazing that you're learning these ways to create these emotionally safe environments. You are teaching about mental health. You're encouraging them to take a deep breath before a test, like really simple things like that. For our little kids, let's do a dance and get our wiggles out before we take a test. And simple little things that you can do in the classroom that makes them feel safe, so that when they do have a difficult feeling or a really dark feeling, then they say it and then we can talk it through, and then we can talk about coping strategies. We can get their family involved. Now we can do something about it instead of them sitting in this difficult feeling year after year after year until they get to high school, and it's unmanageable now because they've been holding it in for so long. You typically see a lot more mental health issues come up in high schools. But
Mm.
if we create these, classrooms that are emotionally safe and we get these kids talking about their feelings in elementary school, then by the time they get to high school, we're managing it and we're talking about it and we're coping and we're feeling better. And then those issues that we see really rise in high school will start to decrease and start to go down. And not because there's more or less mental health issues, but because our kids are coping and our kids are feeling good and our kids are managing with whatever they've got going on.
That's just so impressive, and to be able to get them talking early, so that when they get up to middle school, high school, they're sort of groomed, so to speak, to be open to talking about their feelings and what they're struggling with. So how have you seen that in of course, you've just started in the medical field. I know it's a fairly new job for you. What's the tactic to help the medical professionals sort of do the same thing with their patients? How to get their patients to open up?
Right. So we talk a lot here about trust. We talk a lot about forming connections with patients, especially right now. We are still under COVID precautions over here. And I'm in South Florida, and we still are, wearing masks at work, not so much out in the community anymore. But here in the hospital, we're wearing masks. Visitors are limited. Um, Certain services are limited. Certain resources are limited. So when you come in the hospital, and I actually had Ari during COVID, so I really feel this myself. But when you come in the hospital, it is so lonely.
Yeah.
And being in the hospital is hard. Like nobody wants to be here. And we kind of have to understand that. And we have to recognize that nobody wants to see you right now. And so we have to make their experience here as pleasant as possible, knowing that nobody wants to be here. So we have to build connections with them. We have to break down our own walls. You know, a lot of our staff here are very strict with boundaries, as they should be, but we also have to remember that we're all humans and we're all people. And when you come into the hospital and you feel like doo-doo, and then you're alone and by yourself, and you form a connection with someone, that makes all the difference. And so we have to let our guard down a little bit and be open to building connections with our patients in a way that still feels safe for us, but build trust so that they trust us and that we trust them, and we have a relationship with our patients. One of the other things that we have been doing is we screen every patient for suicide. And at first, our staff were really hesitant because they were like, you know, I don't want to talk about it. And it's not our staff, it's not healthcare, it's everybody. Nobody wants to say that word. But what we started finding was the same thing when we started screening patients, that we had a lot of people, patients screening high risk. And at first it was the same thing of like, well, now we're having more high risk. And I said, no, we're not having more. They're talking about it. They're trusting you and they're telling you and they're being honest with you. But it's not more, I guarantee it. And so it's that same thing of when you create this emotionally safe environment, regardless of if you're in the classroom, if you're in a hospital, if you're this that we're doing, you know, there's a level of trust. Like everything that you do, there has to be trust with your consumer or your client, or, you know, so that they are honest with you and that they open up with you and that they feel connected to you. So it's just so, it's so global, you know, not just in one particular field.
I'll be honest, I'm kind of picturing Robin Williams with his clown suit walking around in the hospital, and
Yes.
I don't quite see you doing the same thing. So
No, I don't walk around in the clown suit, but I will tell you there is a hospital, not the one that I work at, but a hospital, you know, very close to us that has a full-time clown. And when I was a kid, I had asthma, and I had been in and out of the hospital a couple of times, and I went there. Ooh, sorry, it's a little loud outside my door. But I had gone to the other hospital, and she was there. And so we're talking, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And she's still there. And she is a full-time clown that works at that hospital and basically gets to spread joy and spread cheer and make people smile all day, every day. And it really, really makes a difference. Like, you know, I remember for myself, when I had to go to the hospital, I was like, I get to see the clown. Like, I'm not even upset about being here because you felt okay about it. Like you knew that I knew that I was sick and I knew that I needed extra, you know, care, but I wasn't really upset about getting to go hang out with the clown.
you know, I think the hospital can be a pretty scary place no matter how old you are, because usually it's kind of associated with pain or sickness, and the thought of even going is kind of a scary thought. So I think any way that you can sort of help patients to think a little differently about going to the hospital, and making it a more positive experience, even if it's just making it a safe place to talk about what they're struggling with. I think it's a win. So I think that's awesome. Now, you did mention Ari. Tell us about his journey and what he has gone through.
Yeah, so I had him in June 2020. So if we think of the state of the world in June 2020, it was
A
a
lovely time.
disaster. It was a disaster. So he was my third child. And so I know you have more than one. And so you kind of like have this in your head, you know what kind of parent you are. My oldest at the time was 6. Like, I've done this for a couple of years. I was pretty sure what kind of parent I was going to be. My pregnancy was great. There was I don't particularly love being pregnant, but the pregnancy itself was fine. But then in March, we were scheduled to have a little baby moon in March. That didn't happen. My baby shower, was supposed to be in March. That didn't happen. And so a bunch of things started canceling, and I got really isolated because we didn't know, at that time, nobody knew what was happening with COVID and what was going on. And because I was pregnant and really far along in my pregnancy, I stayed in my house. I literally didn't step outside my house. And then I had him in June. He was 38 weeks, which is totally a fine time to have a baby, and everything was fine. And I went into labor on my own. I got to the hospital. Like, there was literally nothing to think that there would be a concern. I had a scheduled C-section, so they give the baby to my husband, and then the baby and my husband and the nurse go to the recovery room. And again, third baby, third C-section, like totally knew what was happening, knew the process. And then I get to the recovery room after I'm, all put back together, and my husband's not holding the baby. And I was like, what's going on? What's happening? And he said, oh, they're checking him out. And I was like, no, this has never happened before. And they said, yeah, he was breathing a little bit weird, so they had to check him. And then all of a sudden they came in, and this was all like within minutes. They came in and said, oh, we have to take him. And I was like, what is happening? What are you talking about? And his oxygen had dropped and he was struggling to breathe. And at first they were just kind of looking at him and seeing what was going on. And then they noticed that he continued to struggle and his oxygen continued to drop. So they took him to the NICU to get an evaluation. And so I thought, even then, okay, they're going to give him an evaluation and then bring him back. And, it'll be fine. And then all of a sudden he didn't come back. And it was, no, he's admitted. Okay, now he's intubated. Now he's, we had to medically induce a coma so that he couldn't feel any pain. And, it was all this, like, what is happening, bam, 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 one right after the other. And we had found out, many hours after maybe it wasn't hours, but right when you have a baby, you don't have a concept of time. And, but it felt like a long time that we found out that both of his lungs had collapsed, which I didn't even know was a thing. Like, I did not know that could even happen to a person, much less a newborn baby. But there's no reason for it. Nothing happened. Nothing went wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. When he was born and he was exposed to air, your lungs are supposed to inflate, and his didn't. And there's no known reason why. And so they kept saying, we'll give him this medication and that usually fixes it. And then it didn't. And then they said, well, now we have to manually inflate his lungs. And that usually works, but then it didn't. And so then he had to have a procedure where they put in a chest tube and they're manually inflating his lungs and, all kinds of stuff. It had to stay in for, a couple of days. And then they say, well, that usually works. And if it doesn't, there's nothing else we can do. Like, this is the last thing that we do to treat this condition. So then it was like, holy cow, right. What if nothing else worked? Like, what if this doesn't work? And my husband and I had to have these conversations of how do we tell our other kids that we're not bringing a baby home. Like, this is a real conversation right now that we just, went through 9 months of preparing for this baby to then tell our children that he didn't make it home. And you never got to meet him because of COVID. And, in our other pregnancies, like everyone's waiting in the waiting room, everyone comes and sees the baby. But no, you're not allowed in the hospital because of COVID. And so now we didn't bring this baby home and you never got to meet him. And it was hard. It was so hard. And, my husband and I are both therapists, and we were like, oh my gosh, we need a therapist right now. Like, we don't know how to handle this ourselves, because when you're in it, it was just the hardest thing ever. And I started to journal. I wasn't even allowed to touch him because of COVID and because of his specific condition that he had, and the different wires and tubes and everything that he had.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to even touch him, where all the other moms that are in there, and my husband wasn't even allowed to be in there either. After we were discharged, I was the only one allowed in there in the NICU. And, all the other moms are at least like rubbing their babies or holding their hands. So, a lot of them at a certain point get to hold their baby. And I was told you can't even touch him, because if he flinches, a flinch could recollapse his lung.
Oh, wow.
Like, he can't even flinch. He can't cry. He was so heavily sedated so that he wouldn't cry. And so I literally would go to the NICU every day and just sit there and look at him, because I wasn't allowed to touch him or do anything. We weren't allowed to bring in anything. We weren't allowed to bring in food. We weren't allowed to, for myself, you weren't allowed to bring in books. You weren't allowed to bring in like nothing. I was allowed to bring him like a stuffed animal, one stuffed animal to have in his bed. So I started writing, and I was writing on my phone. You weren't allowed to have your phones out, so they would give you plastic bags to put your phone in. So I'm sitting at the NICU staring at my baby with my phone in a plastic bag, and like trying my best to journal out my feelings on my phone. And that became Ari the Brave. And all of these like, emotions and feelings, and the good days and the bad days. There's, hard stuff that Ari goes through in the book. He encounters a fire breathing rhinoceros. And for me, that was like the bad days, when, it felt like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? In the mind of a kid, like a rhinoceros seems, impossible. And then, we had some good days where things started looking up, and where they said, he's really responding well to this treatment, or the chest tube worked and we're going to take it out and we're going to see how it goes. And, this seems to be a success. Like, so, on that day I was writing about him building a fort, and which I know you have a book about a fort.
That's
And
right.
and so he's building a fort, and he's climbing trees, and he's playing. And so I just took these difficult moments that I was having and that really he was going through. But I think as a baby in the NICU in a coma, I also was wondering, like, does he even know what's going on? Like, does he have any idea that this is hard? Like, they said he wasn't in pain, but like, is that true? You don't really know like what they're getting from this. So for me, I turned it into rhinoceroses and monsters, and, but also playing and sword fighting and hanging out with animals, and, to demonstrate like the hard and the good stuff that was happening while we were there.
What an amazing story, that you're doing all this while sitting next to Ari. You're not allowed to touch him, but here you are with your cell phone in a plastic bag, doing what you can to sort of process what you're going through. Wow, I mean, it's just amazing. I would like to hear, and maybe you don't know yourself, how this has sort of shaped you for the position you're in now, to help hospitals,
Mhm.
deal with patients, or parents even, who are going through hard things, and maybe they don't have all the answers, and yeah, they can't have visitors and all this. It's such a mess. But let's talk a bit more about your series. Tell us why you felt it was important to take these books off of your phone and have them illustrated and printed and available for other families.
Yeah, so I've always been a writer, right? Like, and I've always thought that there's a difference between a writer and an author. And I've always been a writer. When I was in fourth grade, I wrote a story at school that won this award, and I got to read it in front of the whole school on the auditorium stage. And it was funny. It was just a funny story, and I loved making people laugh, and I loved being on that stage and seeing the whole school laughing at something that I created.
That's
And so
awesome.
I've always loved that. Like, I've loved to make people laugh, and I've loved to be funny. And I would, write silly things all the time. I went through this period in my life where I was writing like parody songs, and I love Taylor Swift. So I would write like, different parodies about Taylor Swift, which then became like a really popular thing to do. Now we have TikTok and we have Instagram
Mhm.
where people do that. And I was like, I was doing that 15 years ago. I just didn't record it. And so I've always like done silly things like that. And my husband, has told me for a long time, you should, like, when I would make these silly Taylor Swift songs, he was like, you should record it. And I was like, no, that's silly. Well, I missed the boat there. And and then like I'd write, other little things. And he was like, try to publish that. And I was always like, no, it's so silly. Like, and I'm just being silly, and I'm just being like funny. It's not real. And then when I started writing this, I was like, oh, this is real. Like, this could really help someone. And then as I was writing it, I was like, this is real and this could really help someone, but also it's kind of funny. Like, there's a funny element to it. And I kind of looked back on myself and thought, like, how, silly of me to think that me making people laugh wasn't real, like wasn't good
Mhm.
enough. And that
Yeah.
was always kind of my thing, that I thought like just making people laugh wasn't good enough, that you had to have like real substance. And I finally had something of real substance that I felt like was worth publishing. But then my second book is all funny. Like, it has a lot of substance too, but it is mostly just funny. And I realized the power of making people laugh and making people smile is just as important as having gone through something really hard that then created this really deep substance. Like, all of that is really important. So there's parts in, both of the Ari books that are going to make you smile, that are going to make you laugh. But then parts that are, going to make you think, oh, wow. Okay. And, I've had people message me saying, that they cried at the end. And, so then you're like reading this one short kids book, and you're laughing and you're smiling and you're going, oh my gosh. And you're crying at the end, like all in this, 30 pages. So
What a
that was
healing
it.
experience. What a
Yeah.
healing experience. I mean, even
Yeah.
though it doesn't have to be an inspiring story about, a child who has a disability or whatever, a funny story that makes people laugh and smile and cry. I mean, that's healing. And even I'm thinking, I'm still thinking about hospitals, like just being able to read stories like that to their pediatric patients. I'm sure it could be very helpful and positive thing. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's awesome. So walk us through the stories of Ari the Brave. So you have Jungle Journey, I believe, was the first one,
Hmm.
and then followed by the Magic Dream Fairy. What exactly are they about?
Yeah, so the first one, Jungle Journey, is really specific to my son's experience in the hospital. And so it starts with him. He's a little older because you can't really have a baby crawling through the
A
jungle.
baby
But
hero. Yeah.
yeah. So that was kind of funny though, with my illustrator saying, okay, here's a picture of my baby and here's a picture of my older kids. Now make this baby look older. And so that was kind of a funny experience. But it really starts with him, needing a surgery. And we pulled, some people's names that actually were with us in the hospital. Um, so, there's a cheetah in there. Her name is Cindy, and she was our charge nurse, and she was, the person in charge of taking care of us. And then we have Dr. Joe, who is a shortened name for the doctor who performed the surgery on him. And so it really is about him going into the hospital and him being really nervous. And his mom saying, it's okay to be nervous, but it's also okay to be brave. And so that was really important to me to, let kids know that bravery is not fearlessness. Bravery is having fear, but still moving forward and still getting through it and still, going through the hard stuff, because you have to, right? Like his lungs weren't working. He didn't really have a choice and if he was going to do this or not. And so it's scary and he's nervous. But he decides that he's going to turn this experience into a jungle adventure. And so when he falls asleep, from the anesthesia, which the book actually kind of goes through how to have these conversations with your kids. So I worked with a child life specialist to kind of get down the language that I wanted to use when we're describing the surgery to Ari in the book. So it kind of goes through how to have that language and how to talk to them about what's happening. And then how to have that validation of, yeah, it's okay to be nervous. And I'm kind of nervous too, but it's also okay to be brave. And in this situation, we're going to be brave because in this situation, we have to. And so then he falls asleep. He has this, crazy jungle adventure. He sees all kinds of crazy creatures. And that was really important to me too, that there's like a flying alligator on one page. There's a miniature, his sidekick is Cindy the cheetah, and she's pink. Cheetahs are very fierce, but she was pink. So she was also kind of lovable and fluffy, but still fierce, which was exactly how his nurse was. And so he has some tough days while he's in the jungle. He encounters a fire-breathing rhinoceros that he has to challenge and fight. He's, building forts, and he climbs trees, and he hangs out with all these, weird creatures that he sees. And then, in the end, he's reunited with his parents. And he was brave, and he made it through. And so it kind of goes through those crazy moments, those hard moments, but also the fun parts, like he gets a popsicle and silly things like that. So it's going to make you feel scared when he encounters these big scary monsters. It's going to make you laugh when he's hanging out with the cheetahs and the other animals. And then it's going to make you cry at the end when he reunites with his parents.
Absolutely. And you have that chart in the back of the book with some of the terms that might be used in a hospital visit, right?
Yeah. So that was really important to me because, you don't want to tell a kid, oh, you're okay. Which, I've done that before. I think we all tell our kids you're okay at some point in their life. But
Are we really just telling ourselves that?
Right, exactly. We
Yeah.
need to hear that too, right?
Yeah.
But, it's really about using language that is honest but makes sense to them. It's not lying to them like you're going to go to sleep and be fine. It's how to have these conversations in an honest way, but in a kid-friendly way, because I've heard it all too many times that we as parents try to protect our kids from the hard stuff by lying to them and by acting like everything is okay, or by not telling them the whole truth about what's going to happen. And at one point in my story, I had said, when you wake up, you'll feel all better. And the child life specialist was like, don't say that. He's not going to feel better. He's going to feel horrible. Like it's going to hurt. When he wakes up, he's waking up from surgery. He's going to be in pain. So don't tell him he's going to feel all better. It's like this false security of, wanting them to feel better before they go in. But then when they come out and they wake up and they've had surgery and they are in pain, there's a sense of like, wait a second, you didn't tell me this. So I took that part out. And so there's that chart of how to explain an IV, how to explain a shot or a vaccine, how to explain like your blood pressure, right? Because that can hurt to a child. Like, why are you squeezing my arm like that? And, all these things that as adults, we've been through a bunch of times and we get it, but as kids, they don't understand why that's happening or what it is that's happening. So that language, I was really happy that we were able to get that in the book. And like I said, I worked with a child life specialist that's their job, is to, work with kids that are in, medical situations and explain things to them and help them cope with, different experiences. But, mostly it's related to healthcare and medical situations. So, yeah, I'm happy we were able to do that.
The sequel, Ari the Brave and the Magic Dream Fairy, was this also written on your phone in a plastic bag, or was it something that you wrote later?
It was written on the phone in the plastic bag. And so that one also, it was inspired by my oldest daughter's experience in my baby's NICU stay. So I started the first one writing about just his experience in the hospital, but then, you want to spend all day, all night, but, in the hospital with your new baby, but you can't forget that I had two other kids at home. I had a 6-year-old and I had a 1-year-old. Like, I had another whole baby at home.
Yeah.
And they want their mom too, and they don't really understand. The 6-year-old understood some things. The 1-year-old understood nothing except that I wasn't home. And, so it was really hard. So my second book, and in the process of, tightening up the third book. And hopefully, I'll get working on that one. But the second book was all about my oldest daughter's experience during that time, because it was his NICU stay, but they were having their own experience of it. And my oldest daughter, she started having really bad nightmares. And she had, all kids have nightmares here and there, but when he was in the hospital, it was like every single night waking me up, which when, I spent all day in the NICU, and then I would come home and I would spend all night pumping because I had to make milk for him to eat. And then you're waking me up because you're having nightmares. I was like, ugh. So we started playing this game of, okay, what was your nightmare? And she would say, there was a monster chasing me. And I said, okay, next time that monster chases you, pretend that he's skateboarding and pretend that he's wearing a crazy outfit, a silly outfit. And then slowly, like, she stopped waking me up in the middle of the night. And she would wake up. She would wake up in the morning and say, like, oh, I dreamed that I was getting eaten by a shark, but then the shark, he started surfing and we were surfing together. And I was like, yes. So this idea of, changing the nightmares into something funny, into something, silly, was what helped her. So that ended up being, I started writing about that on my phone in the hospital, about her experience. And that's how that came about.
In this second book, you have several pages in the back that give some great tips for how to deal with anxiety and fear and things like that. And you walk through some relaxation techniques. In fact, it's quite a few actually back there. Could you just explain some of those to us, maybe 2 or 3 of them? Just kind of walk through how to do them, maybe?
Sure. So one of the most important things when it comes to anxiety is your breath. So the way that you breathe. And one of the things that I do when I'm working with kids is if they can, depending on the situation, is walk through how your breath affects your feelings. And so I have them breathe really heavy and really fast. And so I say, okay, breathe like this. And I say, okay, how do you feel? And they're like, tired and worn out. And I'm like, yeah, look at your eyes are twitching, right? And your brain is like on overdrive, and you start to feel scared of something, even though there's nothing to be scared of. But because your breath is heightened, your whole body starts to say, uh-oh, fear, I'm scared, I'm anxious. And it starts to turn on anxiety mode. So then we walk through, okay, now breathe slowly, sit back, be comfortable. Breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. And they're like, okay, now I feel tired in a way that I want to fall asleep. And I'm like, yeah, when you feel tired and you want to fall asleep, that's because your brain feels relaxed. Your brain can't feel relaxed if you're on overdrive. So then the third thing that I walk them through is, where is your breath? So I have them do that slow breathing and identify where they're feeling their breath. And a lot of times they feel it in their chest. So like up, up here, or, right here. And so they feel that breath in their chest. And the reason for that is because when you're about 7, 8, 9 years old, your breath moves up. Okay. So when you're born, you breathe deep in your belly. And then when you start to get older, your breath starts to move up to your chest. And that belly breathing is actually a lot more relaxing for you, but it's unnatural because our bodies change. And so I have them put their hands lower on their belly, and I have them practice really breathing in their belly and trying to make their belly get bigger. And I stand up there and when I'm teaching a class, I embarrass myself and I make my belly get big, and then I make it get small and I make it get big, and I show them. And they have to kind of concentrate to get their breath down, move it back down. But it's possible, and it's possible even for us as adults. We've been breathing in our chest for so long, but it's still possible for us to move that breath down and relax and make our bellies get big. And when we can do that, that tells our brain, I'm relaxed, I am safe, I'm okay right now in this moment. And so that is skill number one, is getting our breath to slow down and moving our breath down from our chest down into our belly, and really, putting your hands where you want to feel your breath down low in your belly, and making your belly get bigger and then smaller and bigger and smaller. And then after you've got that breath figured out, you can start to work on, some other strategies. So one of the other things that I really like that's in there is progressive muscle relaxation. That's a big word for a little kid that's reading a picture book. And even for adults, they're like, what's that? I've never heard of that. But one of the things that I do when I work with kids or parents or adults, for anybody, is I say, how many of you are sitting here right now and your tongue is up on the roof of your mouth? And almost everybody raises their hand. And I say, you're stressed. Your body, when you start to tighten up, that's one of the first things that tightens is your jaw and your tongue and your mouth. So we often sit in this state of tightness with our tongue up on the roof of our mouth. So we play this game called Fly on Your Nose. So I say, okay, imagine you have a fly that's buzzing around and it lands on your nose. Now you have to get the fly off your nose without moving any other parts of your body. And so then again, I embarrass myself and we try to get the fly off of our nose. And I say, deep breath first and get the fly. And so we go through that, and what that does is it focuses all of your muscle energy into your face and allows your face and your jaw to relax. And so that's something that we do at bedtime, especially, get that breathing relaxed, and then relax the muscles in your body. So you can do that with any body part. Now, a lot of times as adults, we just say, okay, I'm going to squeeze my hands and then I'm going to let it go. I'm going to squeeze my hands and let it go. You notice when you get really angry, people get their fists up when they're angry, right? Or you start to tighten up. And a lot of times you don't even notice that. So kids do the same thing, but they don't tend to respond to okay, close your fist and open it, close your fist and open it. You have to give them some kind of visual. So that's where the fly on your nose comes in. We also have the lemon squeezy. So instead of just saying, tighten your hand, I actually make them pick up a lemon, hold the lemon, and squeeze the juice out as tight as you can, and then shake it out. And so that then tells your muscles that I'm tightening and I'm okay. And that physical shaking out all of the energy that is in your body, tightening up your muscles. So when you're breathing heavy and your muscles are tight, your body is just all in I'm stressed and anxious mode. And it is really hard to fall asleep like that. So those are some of the games that I put in there. Everything in the back of the book is engaging and interactive. It's something that you can do with your kids and that your kids can respond to and engage in to get them to, fall asleep easier, stay asleep. And if they don't stay asleep, at least it keeps them in their bed. Because that's really important for kids to be able to, not that they can't rely on you, but if they do wake up in the middle of the night, that they have a strategy that they can use on their own to fall back asleep. And, if they really can't, or if there's, really scary nightmare or something happens or they don't feel good, whatever, of course they can, come wake up their parent and be helped by their parent. But it is so empowering for kids to have strategies of their own that they can do in their own bed and put themselves back to sleep. So all of that's in there and more.
I love that these activities are so visual and physical, and they just make you laugh. It's a fun little mini game, so to speak, that kids can do, and it goes so well with your books being the funny stories that they are, and so imaginative. And what I love most about your books are the fact that the illustrations are just there's so much motion and so much activity on every page. And I think Sarah especially Sarah Netuna, is that how it's pronounced? Has done such an amazing job with the illustrations. So for our audience that might be authors, I want to kind of focus on that a little bit and ask you, how did you find Sarah, and what was it like to interact with her as author and illustrator?
Yeah, so I actually found her on Instagram. So I first started looking through websites like Fiverr and Reedsy, and I had a budget that was too low for illustrations. And so I started thinking about, okay, I can probably get my illustrations done for like $1,000. And then as I did research, I was like, okay, that's not going to happen. So I stepped back and I saved up a little more money. My parents actually helped give me a little bit more money to be able to afford illustrations. Instead of finding somebody who, would give me $1,000 worth quality, I, wanted quality that I would be proud of, and not just a book to put out there, but something that I would be proud of. So I stepped back from those websites and I said, let me look at Instagram and let me search hashtags. Like I was literally searching hashtags and saving illustrators information. And then I started emailing them and setting up, I wouldn't say interviews, but kind of, to see like who I would jive well with. When you're writing a book and you are in the illustration process, you are talking to this person like every day. So you have to make sure that you jive with them and that you like them as a person. That was really important to me, that yes, you have good art and yes, you're a good illustrator, but I like you because I have to talk to you every day. So I set up Zoom conferences with several different people, with several different illustrators that were within my new budget. And, I ended up picking her, and, I jived with her. She was a fairly new illustrator. I wasn't her first book, but it was, she was still kind of new. And so I kind of liked that she had a little bit more experience, but we were also kind of going through some of this newness together. So that was kind of cool. And just her illustrations and the couple of samples that we did just really, really spoke to the story. And she really got down like the scenes that I wanted to, because, you know, one thing with the picture book is it's not a movie. Like, you don't get to show the whole book. You have to pick these scenes that you kind of are screenshotting, right? Like when you write this book, it plays in your head, this like movie reel, but you have to screenshot it and get it on a paper. And so you have to find someone that's screenshotting the right moments, you know, because you can read this whole page and there's, you know, 3 or 4 different things going on that page, but which part are you going to screenshot to capture, you know, really what you want to convey in here? And so that was really important to me, and kind of talking through some of that, like, how would you picture this? What's your idea for that? And she would always give me several different options. There's, you know, one page in the book that says, you know, Cindy and Ari are walking forever. So that was like, how would you show this? Because you could just show the 2 characters walking, but you have to really be creative to show that. And then there's other pages, you know, that were very specific and very detailed, like a fire breathing rhinoceros came out of the woods, and, you know, it's very specific. But then a page like they're walking forever, how do you make this page exciting? Because walking forever is not exciting. And that was intentional, because there were days when we were in the NICU that nothing happened. It was like, oh, you know, he's there, no change. Okay, no change. Next day, okay, no change. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're just here doing nothing. And so it was intentional, but also you had to make it exciting for the kids. So all those conversations are really important, and having those conversations all throughout and talking about the things that are important to you all throughout. One thing that I asked the illustrators that I talked to before hiring one was, what level of creativity do you want to have? Because this story is about me and my experience. So I want someone who has, you know, creativity that's going to really bring this to life, but is also able to kind of put in little things that are really important to me. So it wasn't like I was handing over my manuscript and just, here, illustrate it, like some people do, but it also wasn't, here's exactly what I want on every single page, do as I say only, right? I needed to have a balance. And all 3 of those exist, where authors like want a very specific thing, or where authors have no requests and it's like, just make this.
Right.
And for me, that balance was really important. There were some pages, like the one where they walk forever, that I didn't really know what I wanted on that page. And I asked her, like, you know, please let your creativity fly on this page, because I'm not really sure. And so that's something really important for your illustrator to know up front, like, what amount of creativity are you going to give them? Especially with an illustrator, illustrators are creative beings. And if you give them, you know, that, okay, fly with this page, they will go crazy. And that to me was amazing. Like, I wanted that. I wanted someone who was going to take this, you know, Ari walks and turn it into something really exciting. And then there were other little things that were really important to me. Like, my older kids drew pictures to keep at the NICU, and they had a cork board in the NICU where you could put different stuff. And so they drew pictures, and I wanted those pictures displayed in the book. And she was like, yeah, we can do that. You know, so just, you know, it's really important to have that you both know what your expectations are, that you know, like, you know, the level of creativity that you're going to give them, that you like them, that you jive with them, that your personalities jive together, and that you have that communication. Because I've heard from other authors that have a manuscript and they pay someone like on Fiverr or something like that, and they give the manuscript and then they, you know, return the illustrations. And like, for me, that just, it wasn't going to work like that.
Yeah.
I need that relationship. I need that communication. I need that, those updates and like, hey, what's going on? And, there were times that she'd call me for like a specific question on a thing. She's like, I have this idea, but before I draw it up, I want to run it by you because it's a little bit out there. And I was like, okay, let's hear it. So then, we would talk, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, oh my gosh, we've been on the phone for an hour, just like talking about life. Like, I'm so sorry I took up all your time. So that kind of stuff is just, it's important. It's important when, for most authors, like, your book is like your baby, right? And you want to have that relationship, and you want to feel good with that person and have that connection with them. So
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's so much more than just a transaction. There needs to be a relationship. There needs to be a back and forth. And I love that you gave her the freedom to kind of put her own creativity into it. And I think that's so key, that, even though it may be like you pay her once and you're done, she also has sort of an ownership into it as well, because her name is on the book. And so to be able to provide that ability to really sort of make it her own in a way, it's amazing. And I can say that I kind of did the same thing with my books. I found my illustrators, both of the ones that I've had, on Instagram, searching hashtags just like you,
there you
and I
go.
love to give them more freedom than maybe some authors have. As a designer, I get a lot of manuscripts, and they'll have the author notes for the illustrators, and lots of times they're just so specific to what they want, and there's no freedom for creativity
Right.
in there. And so yeah, I think it's great to give illustrators that ability. So well done. You two both have such a great partnership, and what you've been able to produce together is beautiful. So, Krystal, you have a full time job,
Yes.
and you have the author life.
Yes.
How do you balance it?
Wait. um it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. I don't know that I always am balancing it. Like, there's some days that I work too much. There's some nights that I go to bed way too late because I'm working on author stuff. Um, Typically my own stuff gets pushed on the back burner because I'm doing things for other people. On top of, writing the books, because of my experience in education and mental health, I write lesson plans for other authors. So like, I'm also, doing that. And a lot of times my own stuff gets pushed on the back burner for my job, or for my kids, or, for the lesson plan clients that I have.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to say, well, this is how I balance it all. And, this is how I'm doing it all. But, some days I don't. Like, some days I'm like, man, I got this, I got my ads done for my book. I, did my work, and I also played this game with my kid. Those days happen here and there, but a lot of times it's, something is giving.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. I think that it's important to know that, especially as parents, there's so much judgment on the way that people parent all the time. And so, people will say to me, oh my gosh, you're doing it all. And I'm like, no, I do it all, but not all at the same time. Every day something is going to give. And, so you just have to make sure that in the course of a week, all of those things got your attention somewhere, knowing that if you just look at one day specifically, you drop some things, but you have to, in order to get it all done. And just, taking that step back and looking at your week as a whole and saying, okay, I gave my kids this attention here, here, and here. I played this game, we decorated for Halloween. Monday was my middle daughter's birthday, and my husband and I took her out for the whole day, just herself. And she was like, she's the middle child, so she doesn't really get a lot of alone time. And she was like, my brother and sister are not coming. And we were like, no, just you. So Monday was all about her, and I didn't work. I didn't do anything for my books. I didn't do anything for my lesson plans. I didn't do anything at all except focus on her. And, so today I'm here focusing on my books. Right after this, I'm going to go do my job. And it's just knowing that every day something's going to give, but at the end of the week, you've given everything the attention that it needs.
For those beginner authors out there, maybe they're working on their first book, it's not out yet. What advice would you give to them?
Oy, for their first book, that their book isn't out yet, I would say start talking about your book. As soon as you decide that these words that you've written are going to be turned into a book, tell people. Start your social media, start your website, get people on your team, introduce people to your team. I think that was advice that was given to me maybe 3 or 4 months into the illustration process. So I had already had like maybe 2 or 3 illustrations done at that point. And I had asked someone, well, it's too early for this and it's too early for that. And they were like, no, it's not. Like, if you can take people through your journey, then they connect with you. So people and new authors I see tend to want to have a product before they give it to the people. But start talking about it as soon as you make that decision that this is going to be a book, and take people on that journey with you. Take people through the highs and the lows and the things that didn't work out and the new illustration and the sneak peek of this and the every little thing. We often do that in like groups. So like Facebook groups, we will share our thoughts and share, what do you think about this? Or especially with our cover, right? When it comes to our cover, it's what do we think of this? What do we think of that? And anybody have advice here or have advice there? But ask your people, right? Ask your audience, get them involved, and do polls and do votes. And one of the things that I did was when I had author photos done, and I posted like a bunch of the photos and said which one should be the one in my book. I had like 200 comments, 200 votes. And I think I only had like 300 followers at the time. So like people were really invested in which picture I was going to put in the book. But they love to feel a part of the journey with you rather than I created this product, I created this book. Okay, now I published it. Here it is. They're not as connected with you. Maybe your family is and your friends are, but you have to get fans, which sounds kind of weird to say, but you have to develop a fan base of people that are going to buy your book that don't know you yet. You have to find people that don't know you yet. And the way to do that is to connect with them. And it goes so much into my work, talking about teachers connecting with kids and the doctors connecting with the patients. And as an author, connecting with your fans. Like at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all want to feel connection. So anywhere that you can connect with people, you're going to be more successful. And that's author advice, but that's like life advice too.
That is so good and so welcoming. I mean, I think about my own author journey, and I was definitely one of those that said, I really need a finished book before I start telling people about it. And then when I do start telling people about it, I feel like I'm just being so salesy. I'm not really inviting them into the process and getting them involved. So great advice, even for authors who are 2 books, 3 books in, like I am. Good advice. So I appreciate that. I think you did hint at another Ari book a little further back. Do you have any sneak peeks? Anything you want to tell us about it?
So that one, I have 3 kids, right? And so my third kid was Ari, that kind of inspired this whole series. The second book was about my oldest experience while he was in the hospital. And then the third one is my middle daughter's experience. And just some things that she kind of went through during that time as well. One of the things that she struggled with and continues to struggle with is anxiety, social anxiety. And so it really talks about, making friends. So she was like 1 and 4 months when COVID hit. And so she grew up like her toddler years were in a bubble. Mm-hmm. And now she's, kind of socially anxious, and she struggles to make friends. And she does make friends, but like if you're one-on-one with her, if there's like 2 or 3 people there, she's like, and you'll say hi, and she's just and so she struggles with being social because of her toddler years being in this bubble. And really that time when you learn to be social, she didn't get that like we did, or like, other kids did. Mm-hmm. And so that third book is about making friends, and it's about that social anxiety. It's about how to put yourself out there as a kid. Because that is the third one, I did not finish it while we were in the hospital. Luckily, he got discharged, and I took a long break from writing while he was at home with me. So I had these 2 books on my phone in the plastic bag, and then like the start of the third one. So, So this third one, I'm still writing it. It's not done being written. So it's going to be a while until that one is out, but it's in the works.
Sure. I think this is going to be something that we are going to be hearing about for generations to come, maybe, or decades to come, how the pandemic has affected us as a society, and especially kids and young kids, teenagers. I think about teenagers that completely miss their graduation, miss prom, and all those things that are so big to a teenager's life, and young kids, like you said, and at these developmental stages, how this whole thing has impacted them. I think we're going to be hearing about it for some time. So tell us about Ari. How is he doing now?
He's doing great. He has no symptoms of his lung collapse from when he was born. He has a good sized scar on his chest from where his surgery was. When we brought him home, the scar was so tiny. And I remember saying to the doctor, like, oh my gosh, you did so great. The scar is so tiny. And like kind of laughing. And she said to me, it's tiny, but remember, he's tiny. Mm-hmm. As he grows, you're going to notice it. And my husband, we walked out, my husband goes, how dare she say that? That was so rude. And I was like, it wasn't rude. It was honest, because I very clearly had this false impression of what this was going to be like. We kind of walked out of the hospital thinking like, he looks like a brand new baby, like all other brand new babies. You could barely see the scar, but she's absolutely right. As he's gotten older and he's grown, the scar has stayed proportionate to his body size. And, sometimes when I'm giving him a bath, I see it, or like, I'll go to wipe it off like it's, dirt or something. And so that, the true scars are emotional, right? Like he doesn't even realize that he has a scar, and we'll say it sometimes like, oh, that's from when you were a NICU warrior, or that's your graduate scar. And, we say silly things like that, but he doesn't get it yet. He's only 2, but the emotional scar is still challenging. Like, when I hear of someone struggling to breathe, I'm like, oh wait, I can't handle that. Or, looking at the scar is just that reminder of that really difficult time that we went through. And all throughout COVID, I was shielding him from everything. Like COVID was a respiratory illness, and he had respiratory issues. Like this whole thing was respiratory, and I was shielding him. And his pediatrician said to me, you have to move on. Like, he's okay. And I kind of laughed and I was like, I don't think I'll ever move on. And she goes, I know, but you have to stop treating him like he's sick, because he's not anymore. And so, you know, physically, the doctors all say that he is fine. Like, he can be a normal kid. There's no, you know, there's no lasting effects of what happened. But I think, you know, as a parent, that it's not ever going to go away. He's always going to be my baby. And he's the third of three. So like, he is the baby. You know, and sometimes I shield him a little bit more than I should. But physically, he's 100%.
How long was he in NICU?
He was in NICU for 14 days.
14 days.
Yeah. They actually said it was going to be longer. It kept being like, when we were there, it was, first it was just, we need to evaluate him, right? And then he stayed. And then it was, okay, it's going to be a couple days. Then when they had to put the chest tube in, they said it was going to be a couple weeks. Then when they took the chest tube out, it was going to be even more, a couple of weeks. But then once I was able to hold him, he turned a corner. And I kept saying that, just let me hold him, let me hold him. Like, please, there's so much evidence to show how important like kangaroo care and skin to skin care is, and how much that makes a difference. And I kept telling them, just let me hold him. And they were like, you can't, like, he's covered in tubes and wires and, you know, all these different things. Like, I'm sorry, you just can't. But then once I finally did, I got to hold him for the first time on day 10. And we left on day 14. And I was like, I told you guys, I told you. And they were like, no, we know, but you couldn't. But that's like, was the turning point. On day 10, when I finally got to hold him, everything started getting better. And he came home on the day 14.
I know a little bit about that. Our son, he's 7 now, and he spent his first 6 days in NICU. He was born just slightly premature at like 36 and a half weeks. So he was in there with jaundice and with some fluid in his lungs and things like that. And not being able to hold them or even touch them, like you said, is hard. And I can't imagine going 10 days. Luckily, we were able to leave after 6 days. Without, 10 days without even being able to hold him is that must have been hard. But I really appreciate you sharing your story, Krystal. The Ari the Brave series, you can buy it on Amazon and other places. I have links down in the description to get your books, as well as my author next week is going to be Teydon Rae. She's coming back. She was on the show a few weeks ago. And this time we'll be talking about the Three Little Monsters and the Cranky King. So join me next week as I speak to Teydon Rae. And Krystal, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Travis. It's nice to talk on Facebook and talk on Instagram and kind of get to know each other, and then, see each other live and do this together. So I really appreciate having me.